The Virelans were a tall, silver-skinned race who lived under soft blue suns and built cities that floated above oceans. For thousands of years, they had believed they were the most advanced and peaceful civilization in their part of the galaxy. They had long forgotten what war felt like. Their history books spoke of battles that happened so far in the past that most thought they were myths. Weapons were locked away in museums, and soldiers were now teachers, scientists, or artists. To be violent was considered shameful. The Virelans had created a society built on calm voices, logic, and diplomacy. They believed that any problem could be solved by reason and kindness. When the first HFY ships appeared on their scanners, the Virelan High Council did not panic. They thought it was a mistake, maybe a lost exploration fleet. They sent a peaceful message of greeting, offering food and trade. For 2 days they waited for a reply. What came instead was fire. The HFY swarm did not communicate. They did not negotiate. Their ships looked alive, made of black metal that seemed to move like muscle. They attacked without warning, tearing through the Virelan defense lines like claws through silk. Entire colonies went dark in hours. The Virelans were not ready for war. Their ships were made for travel, not fighting. Their weapons, old and forgotten, jammed or overheated. Their soldiers, trained for ceremonial duty, froze when they saw the sky burning. The HFY did not want land or slaves. They wanted to consume. They devoured everything. Planets, cities, satellites, and all turned to dust. The Virelans tried to run, but the swarm spread faster than their fastest ships. In 1 week, 27 worlds were gone. At first, the High Council told everyone to stay calm. They said help would come, or that the HFY would tire and move on. But soon even they saw the truth. The HFY were endless. Every ship destroyed seemed to create 2 more. The swarm did not just destroy, it absorbed. Each planet they consumed became new material for their growing fleet. The skies filled with the screams of the dying and the roar of the invaders. Families hid in the dark, listening to broadcasts that said the same thing again and again. Evacuate. Run. Mothers held their children close, whispering lies about safety. Fathers tried to build small ships to escape, but few succeeded. The lucky ones fled to distant colonies, only to find the swarm had already been there. The Virelan scientists, desperate, tried to understand the enemy. They sent probes into the heart of the HFY fleets, hoping to learn something. One probe returned a single transmission before it was destroyed. The message was only 3 words: they eat life. After that, there were no more theories, no more debates. The Virelans faced something they could not reason with. As the war grew worse, the council gathered in the Great Hall of Peace, a place once used for music and art. Now, it was filled with fear. The leaders argued for hours. Some wanted to surrender, hoping mercy would save them. Others wanted to fight, though they knew they would lose. In the end, the choice was made by Chancellor Thalen, the oldest of them all. He stood and said, "We cannot fight this alone. We must ask for help." Those words were hard for the Virelans to accept. For a proud and peaceful people, asking for help was like admitting weakness. But there was no pride left, only survival. Thalen ordered a signal to be sent, a plea that would be carried by light across the stars. The engineers coded the message into every known communication frequency. It was simple and desperate. "We are the Virelans. Our worlds are dying. If anyone hears this, please help us, please." The message left their system like a prayer cast into the void. Billions watched the transmission beam into space, their faces pale with hope and fear. They waited for an answer that did not come. Days turned into weeks. The HFY closed in on the Virelan homeworld, a shining planet of white oceans and silver towers. Refugees filled the skies in broken ships. The capital, Virela Prime, became the last light of their civilization. Then the swarm arrived. It began with a shadow, a dark wave in orbit. Then came the fire. The sky rained molten metal. Towers collapsed. The oceans boiled. The Virelan defense grid fought bravely but was crushed within hours. Chancellor Thalen stayed in the Great Hall until the end, sending the distress signal again and again, even as the city burned around him. He watched the horizon glow red and whispered, "Let someone hear us." In the lower cities, chaos ruled. Families tried to reach the spaceports, but the air was thick with smoke and falling debris. The Virelan people, who had never known real violence, saw what it meant to be hunted. The HFY descended like locusts, their ships breaking apart and releasing creatures that fed on living energy. Streets turned into rivers of fire. The screams of billions rose together into a single voice, a voice begging for mercy. In space, the last Virellan fleet formed a desperate line around the planet. They knew they could not win. Their commander, Captain Sorel, gave the final order. Hold the line long enough for the last transports to escape. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook as she spoke. If any survive, she said, remember us not for our strength, but for our hope. The Virellan ships fired everything they had, turning the blackness of space into a storm of light. One by one, their ships vanished from the scanners. Hours later, the signal from Virella Prime went silent. Across the galaxy, the distress message continued to travel. It passed through the empty systems of dying suns, through dust clouds and the ruins of old empires. Most advanced species ignored it. Some heard the word Deathworlders in the message's translation header and dismissed it. Humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Others believed it was already too late to help, but the message kept moving. Somewhere on a small blue planet that had never known alien contact, a listening station caught the faint signal. The transmission was weak and broken, full of static, but the meaning was clear. A cry for help from across the stars. The scientists who found it were shocked. They thought it was a trick or maybe some interference from a deep space satellite. But when they cleaned the signal, they saw the image. A silver-skinned being, eyes wide with fear, whispering in a trembling voice, "Please help us. They are coming." On that day, the story of the Virellan stopped being only theirs. In the last hours of their homeworld, the few survivors who managed to flee looked back through their ship windows and saw their planet breaking apart. The oceans lifted into the air and the ground split like glass. The Harkai fed on the planet's core until even its light went out. The refugees drifted through the dark, engines dying, whispering prayers to anyone who might listen. Some ships turned their lights off to hide. Others sent out the signal again, weaker each time. In their hearts, the Vireyans knew that no one might come. But still, they hoped. Because sometimes hope is the last thing a dying world can offer. And somewhere far away, a world called Earth was beginning to listen. The message from the dying Virellan world traveled silently through space for many years. It passed through the dark between stars, through ancient dust and forgotten ruins, until finally, one day, it reached a small yellow star with 8 planets. Around the 3rd planet, a blue and green world full of storms, mountains, and oceans, the message stopped. The world was called Earth. The people who lived there called themselves humans. At that time, Earth was not at peace. Humans were busy arguing about politics, borders, and money. They had wars, hunger, and problems of their own. Yet even with all their struggles, humans were always looking upward, building satellites, sending probes to Mars, and dreaming about life beyond their sky. On a quiet night, in a small deep space monitoring station in the deserts of Australia, 2 technicians were watching a screen filled with static when a strange signal appeared. It was faint and broken, but it repeated in a pattern that didn't match any known signal. At first they thought it was a glitch. Then when they cleaned the sound, they heard a voice. It was soft, trembling, and unlike anything human. "We are the Virellans. Our worlds are dying. If anyone hears this, please help us, please." The technicians froze. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The computer kept repeating the message again and again, and the words seemed to echo through the room. They called their supervisor. Within hours, the message was being studied by scientists, linguists, and military experts all around the world. When the truth came out, everything changed. The news spread faster than light itself. First contact confirmed. Aliens beg for help.
Humanity not alone.
Headlines flashed across every country. People ran to their televisions and phones. Some celebrated and cried with joy, thinking that humanity had finally found friends among the stars. Others were afraid, believing it was a trap or a sign of doom. Governments called emergency meetings. The world's most powerful leaders gathered in secret rooms, listening to the message over and over, trying to decide what to do. In one of those rooms deep beneath Washington, D.C., the President of the United States sat with generals, scientists, and advisors. On a large screen, the image of a Virellan appeared, tall, silver, and covered in glowing wounds. The alien's eyes looked desperate. The President turned to the scientists and asked, "Is this real?" The head of NASA nodded. "Yes, sir. It's real. They're not from our system. Their signal originated 500 light-years away, and they're dying. The room fell silent. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just thinking about itself. The message united people in a way that no treaty or religion ever had. Protests stopped. Wars paused. People across the world looked at the stars and wondered if they could really help. Some said it wasn't their problem. Others said, if they were the ones dying, wouldn't we want someone to help us too? Meanwhile, the Galactic Council, a group of ancient alien civilizations far older than Earth, also received the message. They knew about the HFY swarm. They had seen what it did to worlds before, but none of them moved to help. The Council was afraid. They had fought the HFY once long ago and nearly died. So they decided to stay silent, watching from afar. In their hidden chambers, they whispered about the humans. They come from a death world, one elder said. Their planet kills its own children. They are dangerous. Another nodded. They are unpredictable. If they go to war, they might destroy everything. So they waited to see what the Deathworlders would do. On Earth, scientists tried to learn everything about the Virayans. They decoded the message completely and mapped the coordinates of their homeworld. What they saw shocked them. The planet was dying. The HFY swarm had destroyed most of the system. Satellites caught faint energy readings from burning cities and shattered moons. Billions of lives were gone, and still the message kept repeating, as if someone somewhere was still hoping for an answer. In a conference held by the United Nations, delegates from almost every country gathered. For hours they argued. It's too far, said one. We can't even reach Mars safely yet. Another shouted, if we do nothing, we're no better than those who watched us suffer in history. Finally, a young woman from India, a scientist working with the space agency, stood up and said, we call ourselves human. Then let's act like it. We may not have faster ships or stronger weapons, but we have something better. Courage. Her words spread across the internet and into people's hearts. Soon, the decision was made. Humanity would try. The greatest powers of Earth, America, China, India, Russia, Japan, and the European Union, joined hands for the first time. They shared technology, built a global fleet, and trained soldiers and engineers from every corner of the world. The mission was simple but impossible: to travel to another star and save a dying species. The project was named Operation Dawnstar. Spaceports were filled with activity. Factories ran day and night building engines, weapons, and life support systems. Scientists who once competed now worked side by side. Artists painted murals of the Viralans, calling them the first friends of mankind. Soldiers lined up to volunteer, knowing they might never return. Some said they were doing it for glory. Others said it was for hope. But deep down, they all knew it was because they couldn't ignore the cry for help. In a hangar in orbit above Earth, the first warship of the new fleet floated, UN's Courage. It was huge, armored and powerful, built from old asteroid mining ships and new experimental engines. When reporters asked the fleet commander, General Marcus Hale, why they were risking so much for strangers, he simply said, because if we were the ones screaming in the dark, I'd want someone to answer. The Galactic Council watched this with disbelief. Most species took centuries to even agree on peaceful exploration. But humans, the so-called Deathworlders, had declared war on a nightmare species they had never met, just to save someone else. They're insane, said one alien ambassador. They'll get themselves killed. But another whispered, or they might win. Back on Earth, people prayed and cried as the fleet prepared to launch. Families said goodbye to their sons and daughters, unsure if they'd ever return. The launch was broadcast worldwide. Billions watched as the rockets fired and the stars reflected on the steel hulls. For the first time in history, Earth united not for war against each other, but for war against fear itself. Weeks turned into months as the fleet traveled through the dark, guided by the faint signal of the Virulans. On board, soldiers trained and scientists studied everything they could about the HFY swarm. The reports were terrifying. The swarm devoured everything, metal, air, even energy. They moved like a disease with a mind. But humans didn't back down. They made weapons that could burn through armor, drones that could fight in vacuum, and strategies that no alien mind could predict. They were preparing to fight monsters, and they were ready to become monsters if needed. One night, as the fleet passed a dead system, a transmission came in. It was the same voice, weaker now. Please, someone, help us. The soldiers stopped what they were doing. Some took off their helmets, others bowed their heads. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a reminder of why they had come. When the scientists confirmed they were getting close to the Virellan home system, tension filled every ship. The sensors picked up strange readings, the remains of massive battles, drifting bodies, and shattered planets. They realized the Virellans might already be gone. But the humans kept moving. They had come too far to turn back. The day the human fleet entered Virellan space, they saw what no one could ever forget. A once beautiful world burned in silence. The oceans were gone. The land was black. Above it, the HFY swarm hung like a living storm. The commanders didn't even wait for orders. "Weapons free," General Hale said calmly. "Let's show them what Earth does when someone cries for help." In that moment, the message that had started as a whisper in the dark became something far greater. It became a promise. The Virellans had begged for mercy, and the Deathworlders had arrived. The humans had never seen a war like this before. They had fought each other for land, for power, for pride, but never for strangers on another world. Yet when the Virellan message reached Earth and their leaders decided to act, something inside humanity changed. The world that once argued and fought began to move with a single purpose. From the tallest cities to the quietest villages, people stopped thinking of us and them. Now it was just all of us. The human race had decided to cross the stars, not to conquer but to save. Factories that once made cars now built spaceships. Steelworkers forged armor that could survive in the vacuum of space. Scientists who had spent their lives studying planets now designed weapons strong enough to destroy asteroids. Everyone had a role to play. Children drew pictures of brave soldiers fighting monsters in space. Old people donated their savings to the mission. Musicians wrote songs about the courage of humankind. The world was alive with a kind of energy that had not been felt for centuries. Hope mixed with fear. The first fleet was called the Dawn Star Expedition. It was made of ships from every country, every language, every culture. Some ships were brand new, shiny and smooth, built for deep space travel. Others were old mining haulers, repaired and armed with guns that looked far too big for their frames. Each ship carried soldiers, engineers, and doctors, but also writers, artists, and scientists. Because humanity didn't want to just fight. They wanted to witness, to remember, to learn. In training camps across the planet, soldiers learned to fight in zero gravity, to move without air, and to shoot in silence. Many were scared but determined. They had watched the Virellan message over and over again, those silver faces begging for mercy, and they could not forget it. "If they die," one young pilot said, "then what are we even doing here on Earth?" They called themselves the Deathworlders, not as an insult, but as a badge of honor. They were born on a world that tried to kill them every day. Storms, diseases, predators, wars, and they survived. Now they were going to bring that survival instinct to the stars. The training was brutal. They practiced on frozen mountains and in deserts that reached temperatures close to the surface of Mercury. They simulated alien attacks using machines that fired acid and energy beams. Many recruits failed, but those who stayed learned to be more than soldiers, and they became survivors. They were told the truth. The HFY swarm does not stop. It will not negotiate. You either kill it or die. That reality forged them into something harder than steel. In orbit above Earth, the fleet continued to grow. Ships were tested, engines roared, and launch pads glowed red with fire. On the surface, people gathered in parks and on rooftops just to watch the night sky. They could see the bright streaks of light as new ships took off. News channels broadcast daily updates. Another 40,000 volunteers joined the fleet. Medical supplies being sent to spaceports. AI-assisted combat drones in final testing. The Galactic Council, far away in the core worlds, watched in silence. They had seen many young species rise and fall, but none like the humans. "They are reckless," one alien diplomat said. "They don't understand what they're walking into." But another replied softly, "Perhaps that is why they might succeed. They are too foolish to be afraid." The humans did not have faster-than-light travel like the Council. Their ships used experimental engines powered by nuclear fusion and dark matter. These engines were dangerous. One small mistake could destroy an entire vessel, but they gave the humans enough speed to cross the vast distances between stars. The journey to the Virellan system would take months, maybe years. No one complained. They knew the cost. Before launch day, there was a ceremony held at the United Nations headquarters. The leaders of Earth stood together on one stage for the first time in history. The President of the United States, the Prime Minister of India, the President of China, and representatives from Africa, Europe, and South America all spoke as one. "We go not as conquerors," said the Secretary General, "but as protectors. We are the children of a death world, and we have learned to survive not by cruelty but by courage." The speech was broadcast live to every device on Earth. People cried. Even soldiers standing at attention wiped away tears behind their helmets. Then came the day the fleet left Earth. The launch was called the Long Dawn. Billions of people watched from the surface as hundreds of massive ships rose into the sky, glowing like falling stars in reverse. The roar was deafening. Some prayed, others saluted, and many simply stood in silence. A child in Brazil whispered to her mother, "Will they come back?" Her mother smiled faintly and said, "They will, sweetheart. Heroes always come back." But deep down, no one knew. In the weeks that followed, space became their new home. The soldiers lived in cramped quarters, sharing stories about their lives on Earth, the forests of Canada, the sands of Egypt, the cities of Japan. They laughed, argued, and bonded. They were different in every way, different languages, colors, beliefs, but when they looked out the windows at the black sea of stars, they all felt the same thing: purpose. General Marcus Hale, commander of the fleet, was a tall man with a scar across his cheek from an old war. He had seen what humans could do to each other, but this mission gave him hope. "We used to fight for flags," he said during a broadcast to the fleet, "but now we fight for life itself. If that doesn't make us human, nothing will." Each ship had a name chosen by the crew: UN's Courage, UN's Horizon, UN's Valkyrie, UN's Homefire. Names that carried meaning, symbols of what they were fighting for. Inside the Courage, engineers worked endlessly to improve weapons. One weapon, nicknamed the Hammer, was capable of firing molten metal slugs at speeds faster than sound. Another, called the Sunlance, could cut through the thick hulls of enemy ships with pure plasma. These weren't elegant weapons like those of the alien empires. They were ugly, loud, and terrifying. Pure human engineering, built to win, not to impress. But beyond the weapons, it was the spirit of the people that mattered. Humanity had always been called dangerous by the other races because of how they adapted. They could fight in jungles, in deserts, underwater, even in space. They could survive radiation, cold, and hunger longer than most species. Their biology, shaped by billions of years on a deadly planet, made them resilient. The Galactic Council had always called Earth a death world, a place so harsh that only monsters could thrive. And now those monsters were coming to save the galaxy. As the fleet moved closer to the Virelon system, tension grew. Scouts sent ahead reported strange readings, traces of destroyed planets and burned space stations. They saw clouds of debris floating in silence like ghosts. Once they found a drifting ship. It was Virelon. Inside they discovered bodies, frozen and weightless, still clutching each other. The soldiers stood in silence for hours before giving them a burial in space. They placed a human flag beside them and whispered, "You're not alone anymore." Every soldier who saw that promised to fight harder. The fleet became quiet after that. Training stopped being routine. It became personal. They were no longer just fighting an enemy. They were fighting for those who couldn't. Weeks later, General Hale gathered his officers. "We'll reach the Virion homeworld soon," he said. "We don't know what we'll find. We don't know if anyone's still alive, but it doesn't matter. We are going to fight like it's our own world burning down there." His words spread through every ship, repeated in 1,000 languages until everyone knew them by heart. The engineers fine-tuned the engines. The medics prepared for casualties. The Marines cleaned their weapons again and again, more out of nervousness than need. And far ahead, through the black void, the sensors began to detect something: movement. The Harkai swarm. When the first image appeared on the screens, the soldiers stared in silence. The swarm was like nothing they had ever imagined. Thousands of living ships moved together like a storm of metal and shadow. It wasn't a fleet. It was a living organism. Every ship pulsed with a red glow, like veins filled with fire. General Hale looked at the sight and spoke calmly into the comms. "Remember what you are," he said. "You are Deathworlders. Your planet tried to kill you since the day you were born. You survived every storm, every plague, every war. The galaxy fears us because they don't understand us. They call us monsters, fine. Then let's be monsters, but for the right reason. The fleet prepared for battle. Guns loaded, engines roared. Every human heart beat faster. In that moment, fear and courage became the same thing. The Virelians had begged for mercy, and now, for the first time in history, mercy was coming, and armed and furious. As the first human warship crossed into Virelon space, a message was sent out across the stars. To the Virelon survivors, hold on. Help has arrived. And behind that message, the Deathworlders came roaring through the void. When the human fleet entered the Virelon system, the darkness of space came alive with fire. The HFY swarm was already there. Thousands of living ships moving together like a storm. They filled the sky around the dead planet, their black bodies glowing with red veins of light. To the human eyes, it looked like the gates of hell had opened. But no one turned back. They had come too far, and too many had died already. General Marcus Hale stood in the command room of the UNS Courage, his face hard, his eyes calm. Around him, officers shouted reports. Enemy ships approaching, weapons charging, shields failing on the outer edges of the fleet. Hale listened to all of it and gave one command. Weapons free, he said. Let's show them what Earth does when someone asks for help. The first human shot fired was from a ship called UNS Hammerfall. Its railgun launched a slug of molten metal faster than sound, ripping through 2 HFY ships at once. The explosion painted the void with orange fire. The other ships followed. Plasma beams, missiles, kinetic weapons, everything humans had built for war. The swarm answered with energy blasts that burned through armor and melted steel. Space turned into chaos. Inside the ships, alarms screamed. Metal shook. But the humans didn't stop. They fought like they always had. Dirty, creative, unpredictable. One pilot used his damaged ship as a weapon, ramming it into the enemy before ejecting. Another used asteroids as cover, bouncing his shots off them to hit hidden HFY vessels. Every time a human ship was destroyed, 2 more pushed forward. The HFY had never faced enemies like this. They had devoured hundreds of species before, all logical, careful, afraid to die. Humans were different. They were chaos. They laughed in the face of death, cursed and sang battle songs over open comms as their ships burned. They used tactics no alien mind could understand. They turned wreckage into shields, shot through their own debris to confuse the enemy, and fought even when their oxygen was running out. One of the fiercest battles happened above the broken remains of Virella Prime, the Virellan homeworld. The surface was covered in ash and the oceans had turned to black smoke. But below the ruins, deep underground, small groups of Virellan survivors were still alive, hiding in collapsed tunnels, praying for a miracle. They heard the thunder of explosions above and thought it was the end. Then one of them looked up through a crack in the ceiling and saw something impossible. A beam of blue light cutting through the darkness. It was not the HFY. It was the humans. On the ground, human landing ships broke through the atmosphere, their hulls burning from enemy fire. They landed in the middle of chaos, ash, heat, and destruction. Marines poured out, wearing armor so thick that it made them look like walking tanks. They carried weapons that glowed white-hot. The HFY ground creatures, twisted beasts made of metal and flesh, charged at them, shrieking. The humans met them head-on. The battle on the surface was worse than anything Earth had ever seen. The air was toxic. The ground cracked under every step. But the humans didn't stop. They set up heavy guns, built barricades out of wreckage, and fought until the horizon glowed red. A Marine named Corporal Diaz shouted over the comms, "We hold this line or we die trying." And they did. When their ammo ran low, they used blades. When blades broke, they fought with their hands. Every HFY that fell made the others hesitate, something they had never done before. In the orbit above, General Hale watched the ground forces fight. His voice echoed through every ship. This is what mercy looks like. Fire everything we have, and they did. Earth's weapons rained from the sky. Missiles streaked through the clouds, hitting the swarm's hive ships with such force that the explosions could be seen from orbit. The HFY screeched in rage, their hive minds trembling under the shock of real resistance. For the first time they felt fear. But victory didn't come easily. The humans paid a heavy price. The UNS Horizon was hit by a HFY beam that tore it in half. Hundreds of lives vanished in a second. The fleet mourned, but even as they watched the ship explode, its final message came through. Don't stop. Make it count. Those words became a battle cry. On the ground, the Virulons who survived finally saw their saviors. When the first human soldiers entered their tunnels, the Virulons stepped back in shock. The humans looked terrifying, their armor scorched, their faces covered in soot and blood, their eyes cold and determined. One small Virulan child whispered, "Are you angels?" A soldier smiled softly and said, "No, kid. We're just humans." Then he handed the child a water pack and turned back to the fight. The war raged for days. The swarm kept coming. Every time the humans thought they had won, new waves appeared. But something strange began to happen. The Harkai ships started to fall back. They were learning fear. The swarm had no concept of retreat before that day, but now they saw what it meant to face a species that refused to die. Then came the moment that would change everything. The Harkai Queen herself appeared. Her ship was massive, the size of a small moon pulsing with energy. She controlled the entire swarm. Her voice echoed across all frequencies, not in words but in emotions, rage, hunger, and something that almost felt like sorrow. The human fleet turned all their fire toward her. The Queen struck back, destroying 3 human cruisers in seconds. It seemed hopeless. Then a young pilot named Lieutenant Sarah Voss did something no one expected. Her ship, heavily damaged and leaking fuel, couldn't escape. Instead of ejecting, she turned toward the Queen's ship and shouted into the comms, "For Earth! For Virella!" and rammed straight into the Queen's core. The explosion was brighter than a sun. The shockwave hit every ship in the system. When the light faded, the Queen's ship was gone, torn apart from the inside. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, all across the battlefield, the Harkai froze. Without their queen, they were blind. The swarm began to collapse. The humans didn't waste the chance. "Now!" General Hale shouted. The fleet unleashed everything left: missiles, plasma, kinetic slugs. The swarm broke apart, their ships falling into the gravity of the dying planet. One by one, the monsters burned. On the surface, the soldiers looked up at the sky and saw the red clouds begin to clear. The Virulons crawled out from the ruins, staring in disbelief at the humans standing among the wreckage. The air was still filled with smoke and dust, but for the first time in years, it wasn't the smoke of death, it was the smoke of victory. Later, when the surviving ships regrouped, the full cost became clear. More than half the human fleet was gone. Thousands of soldiers had died. But the Harkai were dead too. The Virulon system, though broken, was free. As engineers and medics began helping the survivors, one of the Virulon elders approached General Hale. "You came for us," the elder said softly, when no one else did. Hale looked at him and simply replied, "You asked for help. We heard you." That night, the sky above Virella Prime glowed softly with burning wreckage. The surviving humans and Virulons stood together, silent. Some cried, others prayed. A young soldier picked up a handful of the planet's gray dust and whispered, "It's over." Another replied, "No, it's just the beginning." But not everything ended with peace. In the last hours of the battle before her death, the Harkai Queen had sent one final transmission into the void, a plea for mercy. The same words the Virulons had once spoken, the same tone of fear and despair. No one answered it. Back on Earth, when the message replayed during the debriefing, no one spoke. The president asked quietly, "Should we have responded?" General Hale shook his head. "No," he said. "Mercy is something you give to those who understand it." The Harkai never did. The story of that day spread quickly across the galaxy. To the Virulons, the humans were heroes, saviors who arrived from a world no one believed in. To the Galactic Council, they were a warning. Reports described them as fearless, ruthless, unstoppable. One alien leader said, "They fought like the storms of their homeworld, violent, relentless, and beautiful." But for the humans themselves, it wasn't about glory or fear. It was about doing what was right. They had not come for conquest or power. They had come because someone cried for help and no one else listened. And even though they were called Deathworlders, they had shown the galaxy what true mercy looked like. Mercy wrapped in fire, delivered by hands that had known suffering and still chose to protect. As the human fleet prepared to return home, they left behind a message carved into the ruins of the Virulon capital. It read, "We came because you asked. We fought because you mattered. We are from Earth. When the war finally ended, space was quiet again. The fire of battle faded, leaving only drifting wreckage and broken ships scattered across the sky. The Viralan homeworld, once filled with shining towers and silver seas, was now a world of ashes. Yet in that silence there was something new: peace. The Harkai were gone. The swarm that had destroyed hundreds of civilizations was finally dead, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The humans began to help the survivors right away. Medics worked day and night treating the wounded Virelans, sharing food, water, and medicine. Engineers built shelters from the remains of fallen ships. Soldiers who had once fought with guns now carried shovels, clearing debris and rebuilding broken structures. The Virelans watched in awe. They had never seen such determination. Even after losing half their fleet and thousands of lives, the humans didn't complain or rest. They just kept working. One young Viralan, named Elaris, followed a group of human marines as they carried supplies into the ruins of a city. He asked one of them, "Why are you helping us still?" "The battle is over." The marine, a woman with dust on her face, smiled and said, "Because saving you was the mission. Fighting was just part of it." Those simple words stayed in Elaris's heart forever. Days turned into weeks, and slowly signs of life returned to the planet. The Virelans planted new gardens using earth soil samples. Human doctors taught them how to heal burns and injuries caused by radiation. Children who once hid in fear now played near the human camps, curious about their new friends. The soldiers laughed, shared stories, and even taught the Virelans simple earth games. Laughter began to echo in the ruins where only screams had been heard before. But rebuilding was not easy. The Virelans had lost billions of lives. Entire families were gone. Their cities were shattered, and their memories were full of pain. Sometimes at night, they would look at the sky and see the glowing wreckage of ships still burning in orbit. The humans felt that same sadness. They had lost friends too, people they had trained with, eaten with, laughed with. For every victory there had been a price, and that price was heavy. General Marcus Hale stood on the remains of what had once been the Viralan Council Tower. He looked at the horizon, where the sun tried to shine through clouds of dust. A Viralan elder stood beside him and said softly, "Your people are strong, General, but you lost so much. Was it worth it?" Hale didn't answer right away. He looked at the workers below, humans and Virelans building side by side, and finally said, "If even one of you is still alive to ask that question, then yes, it was worth it." The Galactic Council, far away in the core worlds, finally broke their silence. They sent observers to study what had happened. They couldn't believe that humans, a species so young and primitive, had defeated the Harkai swarm, something the Council had feared for centuries. When they arrived at Varela Prime, they were met by scenes of cooperation and rebuilding. They saw humans sharing food with aliens, soldiers repairing homes, and children laughing together. The observers sent their reports back to the Council, filled with shock and disbelief. "The Deathworlders," one report read, "are not what we believed. They are dangerous, yes, but not because they destroy. They are dangerous because they care, and because when they decide to fight for someone, they do not stop until the universe itself bends." The news of the victory spread across the galaxy. To many species it was impossible. How could the humans, barely known beyond their solar system, do what ancient empires could not? But soon the truth became legend. People began to tell stories about them. Some called them the saviors from the death world. Others whispered that they were not saviors at all, but avengers, the kind that even monsters feared. For the Virelans, the humans became something sacred. They built memorials for every fallen soldier, both human and Virelan. In the center of their rebuilt capital, they raised a tall stone monument made from the metal of destroyed ships. On it were engraved thousands of names, some Virelan, some human, with one sentence written in both languages. They came when no one else would. When the time came for the humans to leave, it was a day of tears. The Virelans gathered to say goodbye, lining the streets as the ships prepared to lift off. They brought flowers and handmade gifts, tokens of gratitude. Children waved small earth flags and musicians played songs of both worlds. General Hale and his crew stood on the platform, surrounded by friends they would never forget. Elaris, the young Virelan who had followed the Marines, handed Hale a small silver crystal. "This," he said, "is from our first city and the one we lost. It belongs to you now, so you will remember that we live because you came." Hale took it carefully and placed it in his pocket. "No," he said, "it belongs to both of us now." Then he saluted and the crowd saluted back. As the fleet rose into the sky, the Virulons watched until the last ship became a star among stars. That night, they looked up and promised never to forget the Deathworlders who had saved them. The journey home was long and quiet. The fleet was smaller now, its halls filled with silence and memories. Many crew members sat by the windows staring at the stars. They had left part of themselves behind on Varela Prime, friends, hopes, even their innocence. But they also carried something new and a pride. They had done what everyone said was impossible. When they finally reached Earth, the planet was waiting for them. Billions watched the sky as the first returning ships entered the atmosphere. There were no fireworks, no grand parades, just quiet pride and tears. The world that had once been divided stood united, waiting for their heroes. General Hale stepped off his ship and looked at the faces around him, soldiers' families, scientists, children holding signs that said "Welcome home." Reporters asked him what he thought of being called a hero. He simply said, "We didn't come home as heroes. We came home as humans. That's enough." Over the following months, humanity changed forever. The Virulon story became part of every classroom, every movie, every song. Children grew up hearing about how their people had crossed the stars not to conquer, but to save. Scientists who had worked on the mission continued building new ships, faster and stronger, preparing for whatever might come next. Humanity had touched the galaxy, and the galaxy had been changed by that touch. But not everyone in the universe was happy. Some alien empires began to fear humans even more. If they could destroy the Harkai, they whispered, what will stop them from destroying us someday? Rumors spread that the Deathworlders were unstoppable, that they could burn entire planets if they wished. But the humans ignored the fear. They didn't need to prove anything anymore. On Varela Prime, the Virulons rebuilt their world with a new strength. They studied human history, learning about Earth's wars, art, and spirit. They took the best of humanity and mixed it with their own culture. 100 years later, their children still told stories about the day the humans came. Stories of metal ships roaring from the sky, soldiers who fought like storms, and a people who taught them what hope meant. One day, long after the war, Alaris, now old and gray, visited the monument in the capital. He placed a flower at the base and whispered, "You kept your promise." Beside him stood a young Virulon student who asked, "Grandfather, do you think the humans will ever come back?" Alaris smiled. "They will, but not because we ask. They will come when someone else needs them. That's what they do." Far across the stars on Earth, that same silver crystal Alaris had given to Hale was placed in a museum. It sat under glass with a small plaque that read, "Gift from the Virulon people. Proof that mercy can burn brighter than any star." Visitors came from all over the world to see it. Children pressed their faces against the glass, imagining the heroes who had carried it through war. The story of the Deathworlders became a legend not just on Earth but across the galaxy. Whenever a new species sent out a distress signal, someone always whispered, "Maybe the humans will come." It became a saying, a symbol of hope and fear all at once. Yet, for the humans themselves, it wasn't about legends or glory. It was about remembering. They remembered every soldier who never came back, every friend they buried under alien skies. And they remembered why they had gone in the first place. Because someone had cried for help, and no one else had answered. Years later, when another unknown signal was detected deep in space, a new generation of humans gathered in the same meeting rooms where it had all begun. They listened to the faint, broken voice on the speakers and another call for help. And without hesitation, one of the commanders smiled and said, "Prepare the fleet." Because the Deathworlders had learned one truth that would never change. Sometimes mercy has to come with fire, and sometimes when the universe screams for help, humanity is the one that answers.